Hi, this is Bob Miglani. I am super excited to welcome you to our Patient Experience podcast. The world is changing in pharma when it comes to patient experience, patient services, patient education, marketing. So much of what we knew 10 years ago has dramatically been shifting from direct to patient models to rebates to PBMs to how patients today are changing and call centers are going away. Are they? I don't know. Let's talk about it. We are here to help you navigate all of that in your job, in your career, in your company, and in your role that you do that's so important. My name is Bob. I've been in pharma, healthcare for about 30 years. And then Jason, my co-host, Jason Grossman, biotech executive, ultra rare disease, many different organizations. But the point is, we're going to bring you the very best in terms of how to grow a beautiful patient experience for your brand, for your company, for your career, for your business. And that's what this is about. So welcome to the podcast. Let's get started. Jason and I today are going to talk to you and share with you what's been going on. There's been a lot of things going on. So on this show today, we're going to cover the patient journey for a minute. But before that, in a hot second, okay, in a hot first 5 minutes, Jason, let's cover the hot news that happened. We're going to go into this in a separate episode, but I want to go through a couple of key points, and I want you to give me your reaction, Jason. Trump RX launched last week. Tell me, what do you think?
So for patients, I think it's great. And we're seeing more and more, not just Trump RX, but we're seeing other companies like Mark Cuban's company and similar opportunities for patients to lower their costs and take some of the burden away from them.
Yeah.
We're seeing that consistently across the board. We're seeing commercials every day, and it's a great thing for patients in the end.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we're going to talk about this as we get into it, is when we talk about direct-to-patient model. We talked about it last week in the last week's episode as well. So I think the same. I think there's greater transparency. And what this means is remarkable opportunity for patients to save cost. It's also an opportunity for pharma companies to go direct to patients, to learn, engage, to get feedback, and then modify their strategies in real time. So let's talk about that. All right, that's good. Trump RX. Pricing transparency legislation is also, a regulation has also been introduced. I'm not sure if it's part of Trump RX, but hospitals today, I saw a clip about Secretary Kennedy talking about the fact that today hospitals have to be transparent in the pricing as well, right? So if you go for surgery one place or another, so that's another place that you're seeing transparency, Jason.
Right. And Bob, there was new legislation that's come up in 2026, delinking PBM compensation from the list price for Medicare, mandating full rebate pass-through. This is going to be huge. The transparency that's going to occur for pricing and rebates, formulary decisions. It all starts Medicare, as you know, is the largest payer in the US. And once that starts there, we're going to see the commercial payers start to adopt that as well. But in the end, again, this is great for patients. They were paying copays based on really high WAC prices.
Yeah.
WAC prices, we know, that's the gross price. It's like the list price on a car. Right. And if you have to pay that list price on a car, your copay, it's huge. But now patients are going to see where all those rebates and all those additional costs are going. And in the end, it's going to lower prices for patients. Yeah. On the surface, Trump RX, this new legislation, it's great for the patient in the end, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, no, that's very important. So thank you for that, Jason. Let's go right into now the evolution of the patient journey. So we're going to talk. The reason we want to talk about this is because we speak to patient services, patient experience managers, leaders, and pharma all day long. And so, and there's a lot of things that are ongoing that they're changing their strategies up this year. This year is about transformation. That's what we're hearing. And when you think about transformation, then you say, well, what's leading to this transformation? What's going on? How has it evolved? And so we're going to talk today, right now, let's get into it, Jason, about the patient journey. This is the patient journey that we put together to look at, years ago, when, if you think about 10 years ago, you go to the doctor, you get diagnosed with a condition, you get a prescription, and you go to your CVS, Walgreens, you go to the drugstore, the pharmacy, and they get prescription, and you get your medicine, you go home, and you take it. It was, generally speaking, simpler and easier. Well, today, there's a lot more complexity. So I want you to give some examples, Jason, of what you're seeing. You've seen, for example, let's say in oncology, and you go to the doctor. What's changed today? Talk to us about what's changed today when it comes to going to the doctor, getting diagnosed with a condition, and then the follow-up treatments or blood tests that you might have to do. Walk us through some of this.
Sure, Bob. If you think about when you and I started in this industry, it was all about big disease states and big markets. It was about asthma, allergy, flu, cough, cold, cardiovascular. Yeah. And you had these huge sales forces that were running around and trying to get time with the doctor and buying them lunch and giving them samples. And it was a one size fit all for patients. It wasn't about getting down on a molecular or a DNA level, because really science didn't really know what that was. It was, let's throw as many pills at people as we can and see what happens. And that has slowly transitioned to personalized medicine. The promise of personalized medicine is starting to come to fruition. And if you think about all of the tests that can be done now, we think about, cancer, we want to talk about it, but we have to. Cancer is down to a molecular level where a blood test can be taken, and a treatment, multi-modality treatment, can be customized for anyone who goes and gets that cancer diagnosis. Yeah. It's miraculous on what can be seen at that molecular level. And there are so many promising treatments that can be layered upon each other that can tackle that cancer. And cancer, people called it the big C because they didn't want to think about it because it was a death sentence. And today, cancer is becoming a chronic disease for some, yes. Not for all, but for some. For sure. And it's just going to keep on extending life and allow people to live their lives with these treatments. Yeah.
And that's really important. I think so. Kudos to the pharmaceutical industry for coming up with these innovations. However, from a patient experience perspective, if you think about the journey, it's not just 2 steps. You go to the doctor, you get diagnosed, and you get your drug. You've got to go, for example, now you're adding in 7 to 10 more steps in the patient journey. And so if you think about doctor visit, then you've got to go back and get a genetic test, as you said, or a blood test. You get the result, and you might have to go to a specialist center. There's centers everywhere now for various complex treatments. Then there's a whole process about insurance and benefit verification that you've got to go through. And then you've got to decide on what you want to do, because maybe the copay is very high, right? Deductibles. So you've got to think about the payment, the financial aspect of it. You might be getting calls, call center calling you and saying, hey, we've gotten your prescription and your copay is going to be this. We did the verification, your benefits, and you've got to decide. And you might have to go back and customize your treatment from the doctor or the center. And then the specialty pharmacy will deliver your drug. And then on top of that, your friends are telling you one thing, Reddit or ChatGPT is telling you another thing. And then you have a life to live, right? You've got work, you've got all this. So the complexity, while we have a lot more solutions and innovations for treatment of the disease today, the complexity has just doubled, tripled. And that complexity has fundamentally reshaped the way we interact with that patient as a pharmaceutical industry, as helpers to enable that patient. So if we go to the next thing, because sort of just to think about this a little bit, Jason, if you think about just the patient perspective, we look at, we move from a doctor tells you what to do to if you look at the spectrum, right? The doctor tells you what to do, meaning, patients were passive. The provider decided, hey, Bob, your cholesterol is too high and you need a statin, for example. And so you had that doctor tell you what to do, to shift to, well, Bob, you got cholesterol. You should be losing weight. Stop eating those burgers at Super Bowl parties, or Jason's house. You're going to Jason's house for Super Bowl. Stop eating those ribs. Go for the salad. If there was a salad, I don't remember if there was a salad or not. But
there was no salad.
It was no salad. See, there you go. Super Bowl. Okay. To now empowerment, where patients, before they walk in to a doctor's office, have more information on their phone. And they want to ask doctors all these really detailed questions that ChatGPT or AI is prepping them to do. So if you see this journey, this patient shift has been moving from a source of a monopoly, if you will, where the doctor had this monopoly and some certain power, which, they still have somewhat today, right? But you still have that power, which that information resided in the doctor. Today, it resides in the pocket of the patient. And that is really, really remarkable. So how are you seeing this, Jason, as your experience as a biotech executive, last, I guess, decade or so, and rare diseases, for example, right? Rare diseases, I still think it's probably still there, but talk to us a little bit about like rare disease, ultra rare diseases, Curabin, and give us a sense if this patient journey, how that's changed for rare diseases, for example.
Sure. Bob, let's bring it back to the doctor for a second.
Yeah.
If you think about probably 15, 20 years ago, the doctor got most of his education through the pharma companies.
Right.
But it was basically from the pharma companies. But now the doctor's inundated with pharma companies, genetic companies, lab companies, and the list can go on and on and on. And it's going down to that minutia level, as we talked about before. And it's overwhelming for the doctor. If you think about all the disease states that they have to cover, there weren't rare diseases 15 years ago, 10 years ago. It was all main diseases.
Yeah.
And now each one of these rare diseases have their own complications, their own drugs. And it becomes harder and harder for the doctor, number one, to grasp all that information. But number two, bringing it to the patient, actually explaining it to the patient in 10 to 15 minutes, because that's all they have.
Right.
So when you think about getting that diagnosis for a rare disease as a patient, what does that mean? What does it mean for my children? What does it mean for my parents? I have all these responsibilities, and their head just explodes.
Yeah.
Hearing every fourth or fifth word.
Right.
And the doctor's talking to them, most likely, all the doctors I've gone to, as if they're a colleague. They're throwing out these big words where, here's your options. What do you want to do? That's sort of the crux of it. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Well, that's when the patient has to go home and go to Reddit, go to AI, go to Google, call all their friends, and try to make an informed decision.
Yeah.
And it falls short. This is where doctors, this is where pharma companies, this is where lab companies, this is where genetic companies have really fallen short in helping the physician. They spend so much money in advertising. They spend so much money on sending reps in. They spend so much money on marketing, omni-channel marketing, to try to get a message out to that physician, try to get a message out to the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And it just it creates complete confusion.
Right.
But that also creates an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what we're seeing, I think you're right, that money is being spent from pharma to that one doctor. And she has like all, if you think about it, you're right. Let's look at the list, right? So the patient is sitting there in the clinic and they're like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And then doctor has all of this information. And that information is accurate. It's legally correct. It has to be according to the regulations, right? According to pharma promotional guidelines. So doctors go to CME, they go to webinars, they go to reps, they go to MSLs who go out and talk to doctors, right? They go to all the forums, they go to, Doximity, they go to all these different places. And then all that information has to translate into 7 minutes. What do I do, doc? And so no wonder patients are becoming a lot more active and they're asking more information. And a lot of this information, I had a oncologist tell me the other day, someone said to him, hey, can I use Ervectamin for this cancer this patient has? And he was like, absolutely not. And he was like, yeah, I think we can. So there's all this social media influencers, right, who are also influencing this patient. But what's happening is that lack of time to educate the patient has forced patients to become advocates. And so what's happened is, if you think about the consumerism, if you quote unquote consumerism, has exploded, as well as deductibles and premiums. If you think about the way that everything has increased over the last few years, and then a lot of patients also want to do digital booking and digital care management. They're okay with that because they're not, as you said, they're not getting that time with their doctor. So I want to turn to a little bit about patient expectations, Jason, today. So, we talked about this before. Our sense is that patients are now expecting Amazon, Apple level experience. Do you see that happening as well in all the complicated therapies, as well as generally primary care, in terms of what they want? But what we're seeing, I tell you what we're seeing here, Jason, what we're seeing is the expectation of patients today is, I know what I want and I want it now. So what does that mean today, Jason, for pharmaceutical executives, pharmaceutical patient access managers, patient services? Tell us what do you think about that?
Sure. So if you think about what you see on TV now and you hear in the news, it's about direct to patient with the invent of GoodRx.
Yes.
We all go to the pharmacy now and we see GoodRx. All the pharmacists, if they're seeing an insurance not covered, they're going right to GoodRx themselves and saying, okay, we can cover it for this price for you, which is usually affordable. So that direct to patient model is now transforming how pharma companies solicit and how they talk to not only physicians, but also to patients. But if you think about other companies, these third-party companies like the Hims and Hers, even Weight Watchers now, we get inundated on TV with these third-party companies who say, hey, all you have to do is call me. I have a physician waiting for you. And we can get you all of these, and they're turning out to be, to start with, and I say start with, lifestyle drugs.
Yes.
For hair, some of us need that, some of us
don't. Right.
And other weight loss,
yes,
and other problems out there,
yes,
that patients have, and they want to take care of, and sometimes they don't want to do it live because it could be embarrassing.
That's right.
So what does that mean for pharma companies? Right?
Yeah.
Pharma companies are now moving their budget away to direct to physician, and you're seeing more and more direct to patient advertising in TV and the internet. I mean, you can't go to a browser without seeing a drug advertising on it for just a regular person.
Yeah.
And it's changing the way pharma companies are structured. So 5 years ago, you would never seen a job description of patient in it.
Yes.
It was always about customers. But now pharma companies are building up their direct to patient centers of excellences.
Yes.
And like I said before, it's not a bad thing. The more and more transparent we become, but with that transparency has to come the education, because when it comes to people's health,
Yeah.
there's nothing more important. But if you don't understand, that's where the miscommunication, the misperceptions,
Yes.
and the wrong information comes out.
That's right. And it's hard now, right? Because if you look at this, there's recent data that show that rare disease and specialty care in pharma has exploded in the last 10 years. And so if you think about the number of new drugs in development, and are primarily in this rare disease, specialty, oncology, neurology, autoimmune, things like that. And what that means is, so if pharma is moving towards that direction, because to be more competitive, right, and be able to have higher fees, you're creating a patient who is more confused and overwhelmed than ever before. So it's not just about weight loss and getting that online. I think that's fine. Even with weight loss, you've got a lot of other potential side effects, right? GI side effects, other side effects, and the patients don't know where to turn to, right? So where do they go? And typically what they end up doing, I don't know if you've seen this in your experience, Jason, but a lot of times patients, want to discuss their problem or condition with their spouse at home, with their loved one. So they go to the clinic, as we talked about, for a 10, 15-minute visit with their doctor, and they go home and they start Googling it, middle of the night, TikTok, they go into ChatGPT, Reddit threads. And what ends up happening is they don't start their treatments. And I don't know, are you seeing that as well? Like high is the abandonment rate has become high as a result of this more complicated journey. Jason, talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many statistics out there about patients who hold off on actually filling their prescription because they don't have enough information to say, I want to take this right now, other than their physician sending a prescription in to somewhere. And that could be to their local CVS, their local mom and pop pharmacy, mail order, specialty pharmacy. It's that lack of information, and it could be clinical, it could be financial, and it could be due to lack or misinformation.
Yes.
The patient could go home, as you said, and talk to their spouse or pick up the phone, call their parent, call their best friend and said, oh, I heard this person had this happen to them on that drug.
Right.
And then all of a sudden in their mind, they're going, I don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they don't fill it. And their doctor never knows.
Yeah.
There's no mechanism that tells the doctor they filled it or not.
Yeah.
So there's this long waiting period of patients actually getting on the drug because of lack of education. And then that's on the front end. Let's talk about the back end. Someone might get on that drug, and then all of a sudden they're talking to a friend and telling him, hey, I just started this. And then the same thing happens.
Right.
I had a friend that took that,
right,
and this is what happened to him. Or I heard this on this website, or I heard this on this commercial. And then they stop taking it, especially if it's a drug where they don't actually see or hear or feel any different, like cholesterol. You don't feel cholesterol, but it's so important to control your cholesterol for your cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
So then they stop taking the drug. It's either delayed filling it or it stopped taking it. And that's where the education gap comes in. I mean, Bob, think about it. You have a 90-year-old father, God bless him, turned 90 yesterday, right? Think about the education. I'm sure he comes to you first.
Oh my gosh.
About anything with drugs.
He had an injection he had to do. And I'm sitting there, and he got the package insert from the injection, a couple of years ago. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, how am I going to, I don't know. I've been in pharma healthcare for 30 years. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this thing? Pop, and I'm like between, my mom saying change the light bulb in the house or fix this or change the filter in the attic or whatever, to how am I supposed to give my father and help him understand the treatment that he's got. I wish I looked on YouTube, I found something and I'm like, okay, why do I have to go through this? Why can't somebody give me valuable content to help educate me to deliver care for my father? Like, I just don't understand it. And we're 2026, okay? It's ridiculous that we don't have patient education at the point of injection, you know? And so I think that's really, really, really important, Jason. And we have a comment, we have a question here, Jay. Let's take that question for a second here. The question from, thank you for that question, by the way. Here's the question. Do you find clinical education roles at pharma companies to help patients through complex therapies will be important moving forward? Jason, what do you think?
Bob, it's going to be huge. Those clinical educators, it's going to be about educating the physician, giving them the tools to educate the patient, making their lives easier. You know, we've all gone into a doctor's office and we see the pamphlets. You take the pamphlet, you read the title, and then it gets thrown on the floor of your car.
Yeah.
Right. But if pharma, and they're going to have to go this way, has the opportunity to educate physicians, number one, continue to educate, but shift some of the dollars to tools that help the physician humanize, right? That's the important thing. We all have heard the term bedside manner. That doctor has the worst or the best bedside manner.
Yeah.
Right? If we can provide them tools that will allow them to educate, to further educate, to reinforce. And Bob, let's face it, if your 9-year-old father got an email or got a text from his or her physician, his physician, the credibility is going to be there. Yeah. Our parents grew up where it was only the physician. That was the only information. And they lived and breathed by whatever their doctor said. Mm-hmm. And over the years, because of all of the excess of information, it's confused everyone.
Yeah.
So pharma has to change their model to provide the tools that's going to bring back the physician credibility.
Yeah.
Instead of your father, whoever his father it is, going to the internet, talking to their friends.
Yeah.
They could feel confident if they got information directly from their physician.
Yeah.
Or a thought leader in the field.
Yeah.
But if it came from that office, from that doctor, then you could say, you know what?
Yeah.
This is probably correct because I believe my physician. The
right.
credibility is there. And those are the tools that pharma is going to have to provide.
Yeah. So I think you're right. So if you think about, I think the question though was about, do you think the clinical education roles to help patients, not to help doctors? So they're doing that. Pharma does that already. So the question is, can you see, and my sense is that, yes, I think there's going to be clinical education roles that go direct to patient. So as we sell the product D2P, we have to educate about the product D2P. That's my sense of it. Now, it's not good. The ideal situation, Jason, you're right, is allowing the doctor, finding a way to get the doctor to educate the patient over time, using videos and content systems and tools, I think for sure. But I do also believe that you're right. Whoever's the LinkedIn user here just, commented was that, yes, I do believe that pharma has to start investing in clinical education direct to patients. And because if you look at some of these sickle cell disease, complex therapies, gene therapy, complex therapies. So I think, yes, absolutely. I hope that, and I think the one thing that Jason mentioned that's really important here for you, the person who asked about this question is that it's not about you alone as the clinical educator to patient. It is you working with the doctor to help educate the patient.
Right.
If
I
we
think that's
really,
the only nuance, Bob.
yes,
Pharma companies know that the credibility
yes,
of the doctor is important, and they're already providing patient education. It's just not in a format that's kept up with digital technology.
that's right, that's right. Because again, I think at some point, clinical educators, direct to patient, they're going to have to follow MLR, right? Like all that, right? And that what that means is it becomes overly scientific, overly complicated, and then guess what? Patients zone out. Like, dude, I didn't sign up for this. I just want a simple answer. And I think sometimes that's where the doctor can actually have a little bit more simpler of an answer that directly, allows the doctor to say to the patient, I think you should do this. So hopefully that was helpful. Let us know if we hit the mark on answering your question. We've got another question here, Jason. I want to from Brian Thomas. Thank you for that question, Brian. We've built a lot of our understanding on clinical trials and traditional medical sources, like textbooks and articles and CME. But to truly help patients day to day, what real world data should we begin gathering? Jason.
So we have so much real world data right now. If you think about clinical, financial, there is just just a huge amount. It's what do we do with it?
Yeah.
How do we humanize it? Right? How do pharma companies take advantage of it? So if you think about clinical trials, right? Everything is digitized. If you think about the information that patients are entering in on themselves or the physicians are entering in on them. If you think about patients who are on drugs and who are out in the real world taking those drugs, you think about the surveys you get, right? Those surveys are real world evidence that pharma companies can collect from a marketing perspective, ask a question, and then in real time course correct or create new materials that's going to help physicians, as we just talked about, with their education.
Yeah.
Again, from a clinical trial standpoint, we could see, why patients either are going on trials, not staying on trials, which physicians are recruiting, which areas of the country are prevalent for a certain patient type or for a certain disease type. So all of that information, again, in almost real time, is allowing pharma companies to enhance and contribute. But the question in my mind is, as a data guy, as an operations guy, and I've built many data warehouses, I've built a lot of KPIs and reports. It's the story you tell with that data. We could have a ton of information, but if we don't know what to do with it or how to interpret it or how to take a different outcome from it, it means nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Data is data. It's the story you tell with it.
The story. Yeah, absolutely. And it's got to be used, right? It's the story you tell with it. And then what do you do with it to change and nudge the patient forward into treatment that is required? So, for example, my sense of it is I think to add to what you're saying is that, yes, you've got to use it differently. And then you've got to modify your strategies, right? Use the data to better inform your strategies currently, right? So, and there's a lot of data out there. You're right, from clinical trials to real world. My sense is in two areas in terms of real world. I think the first is the last mile, right? It's the last mile between the prescription and administration of the product or the therapy, right? It's that last mile. We need to be more precise in what happens in that last mile. We might have some basic understanding, but I don't think it's rich enough right now. I think we have some essentials of the doctor wrote the prescription and ended up in Epic and in the EHR, but then we know from the specialty pharmacy, they got it, they took the drug 3 months later and then they stopped. Okay, those are data points. But to your point, what's the story? What is
And
it
how do
telling
you
me?
capture it?
And
Right,
how do you
Bob?
capture
Adherence. How do you capture adherence? And there's not enough companies that actually talk about how do I keep more patients on drug appropriately,
Yes.
and how does that influence the bottom line, the gross to net,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And what are the mediums that patients actually want to communicate with, and how do I get them to answer something?
Right.
Right, it goes back to credibility of the doctor. Right,
Yes.
if I got a text and it said, hey, Dr. So and so, who I just saw 3 weeks ago, wants to know, did you take your first dose? I'm going to answer back in text or email or something else. Versus if I got a text or an email from the pharma company wanting to know that I got it,
Right.
I'm probably not going to answer it.
Right.
So it goes back to the credibility of collecting that information.
Yes.
And then again, who does what with it?
That's right. That's
Right.
right. I think you mentioned the second thing I was going to say, and you're absolutely right, is that the mode of communication matters today more than ever. And so the real world data, Brian, I think would be really powerful to see is voice, call center, SMS, rich communication service, which is, new RCS, this new thing that we've launched, which is really beautiful. It's a carousel. Anyway, so it's, again, the question is like, how are patients responding to these different channels? Because we know a certain generation of patients don't want to talk to anybody, right? They don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to text, right? We see this with younger populations, right? So it's nowadays more and more. So mode of communication matters. Love to know real world data on mode of communication, what's working, what's effective, what's not. And the second is who is sending the message, to Jason's point. Is that message coming from the doctor or a drug company or a specialty pharmacy? They're unlikely to census, theoretically, they're unlikely to respond. And if it comes from the latter two sources, the pharma company or specialty pharmacy. So I'd really like to see, real world data around the trustability factor of who is sending the content to the patient, and what the patient is seeing and watching and listening to and adhering to. And then the second is the mode of communication. So it really, really matters. But again, going back to your point, I think generally speaking for real world is like, what are we doing with this? Where's that story being communicated, how that's going? And I think that's really important. So Jason, let's wrap up. If hopefully this was helpful, Brian, and the others who are chatting us in real time here. I want to kind of summarize a little bit. I want to talk a little bit, Jason, recently about HIMSS. HIMSS launched, and then they postponed their GLP-1 copy of Wegovy, right? And so let's talk about the pill, right? The pill. So HIMSS said they're going to launch. I was talking to my son yesterday, and I told him about Hims and Hers. For some reason, I was talking about that. I don't know why. He goes, well, shouldn't it be his and hers? They got it wrong. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It should be his and hers, not Hims and Hers. I'm like, okay.
You're a smart kid.
He's a smart kid. I'm like, okay. They give you one for grammar or whatever, right? So they were about to launch their GLP-1 on the market, and then the manufacturer sued them and threatened to sue them, and then so they pulled it off. Let's talk about this because this is really important. Do you feel today more and more people are just going direct and like, in terms of let's end here patient journey wise, is like, do you sense that patients know what they want, but still profoundly have questions they can't answer?
Right. So let's think about these companies that are going direct. It's Hims and Hers, Weight Watchers,
GoodRx,
right?
Right. These others, yeah.
They're starting with these lifestyle drugs.
Yeah. Do
I look better? Do I feel better? Is my performance where it should be? But it's slow. This is sort of a test. It's going to progress to more complicated disease states. And this is where the direct to consumer is coming in. will patients go to and bypass their credible sources? Because in every single one of them, they advertise, call this number and talk to a doctor,
Right.
and they'll diagnose you over the phone,
Right.
right? It's kind of tough to do that with some of the other more serious disease states, and also especially with drugs that aren't either a pill or that are self-injected,
Right.
right? So it's a slow evolution, and I think we're going to see this move into more and more complicated disease states.
Yeah.
But eventually, they're going to have to suck their own physicians into it, because if you think about cancer, diabetes, HIV,
Autoimmune, all that,
autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, you can't have a model like that where you call up and you talk to a doctor on the phone, said, okay, your hair is falling out. Do you have this? Do you have that? What other drugs do you want? Right. For now, it's just going to be lifestyle drugs, but eventually it will move into the more complicated disease states. And you can already see Cost Plus. We talked a little bit about that, Mark Cuban's, and also GoodRx. They're starting in more of the generic drug space, but they're going to move into the more complicated drug space. But again, it goes back to the education, and it goes back to the credibility. How do you move into those without educating the patient? And this is where we talked about previously, pharma companies are going to have to invest and are going to have to partner with them to get the right drug to the right patient without the added angst of the complicated disease state.
And I think that model has to shift. So if you think about this, the specialty pharmacy, I think a big part of driving that is the price is very high, right? These specialty therapies are really high priced, and therefore the patient, has a lot of, sort of copay. So there's that conversation that takes place in the kitchen. And if you do a direct to patient that way, when they're calling, there's going to be more and more hesitation. So the slower adoption is going to happen for pharma. And so pharma really needs to rethink, I think, that strategy we talked about in the beginning, Jason, you brought up, which was to shift the dollars from just educating the doctor now to start educating the patient. The patient wants to know more. They're informed. They want to be engaged. They are engaged. They have everything at their fingertips. They want to buy. If they have these conditions, they want to be more informed about it. So that's that demanding of that and commanding of that is what actually led him probably to launch in the first place. It's like, patients want this stuff. Why don't you just give it to them, pharma? And pharma's like, well, no, we want to, and then now being forced by Trump RX and others to reduce prices and go direct to patient, direct to market. So I think it's an evolution where pharma is being challenged by the socio-political environment here to force to go direct because of the pricing part of it, and also competitive forces. And of course, the patients want it. So I think this is a perfect storm, if you will, for that, really challenging that pharma model. So let's leave one tip, Jason, real quickly. One tip, 30-second, for the patient services leader who's watching this, listening to this, patient, pharma executive, marketing, brand manager, someone who's in pharma and is thinking about the patient journey. What do you say to them right now for their roles and how that role, all of this evolution of patient journey is impacting them? What do you give a tip to them today, 2026? What do you suggest to them that they do as they think about their role in this space?
So, Bob, the tip is we have to think differently. The pharma company of the early 2000s, the strategy, the tactics are not keeping up with what's actually going on in the world. Post-COVID, people want to take control of their own destiny, And to do that, we need to change our model.
Yes.
And for me, that model change is the physician offers the credibility. We just need to offer them the tools and the training to be able to allow patients to take control of their own destiny. That's my tip.
Beautiful. Well said. Well said. I will add to yours, which is that we have direct to patient in terms of selling the product, but we need to move to direct to education to the patient. So we have to think about different models, as Jason's talking about. The world has changed, and we've got to change with it. And that's my tip for patient access, patient services managers. So again, I want to wrap up here. This has been a show of the Patient Experience podcast. We've got a podcast. You can download this episode, check it out on Apple and Spotify. Again, thank you, Jason, for this robust, beautiful conversation about the patient journey. I learned a lot speaking with you, and thank you all for tuning in and asking those really, really good questions. I love the questions that we got today, Jason. I'm sure you'll agree that was really helpful to think about as we try to add value to the roles here. Again, for Jason, this is Bob Miglani. Jason, thank you for joining. Thank you very much, everybody, and we're going to say bye. All right, have a great rest of the day. Like and subscribe. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Have a good day.